Some monsters crawl out of legend. Some are born in shadows. But Michael Myers? He came from a small town, on a quiet street, behind a white mask, and changed horror forever. He doesn't speak. He doesn't run. He doesn't explain. He kills. And that silence, that lack of reason, is what makes him terrifying. Because there's no why, no motive, no mercy, just evil. On Halloween night, 1963, a 6-year-old boy took a kitchen knife and murdered his sister. No warning, no emotion. Just cold, calculated death. And from that moment on, Michael ceased being a person. He became something else. Something Dr. Loomis would call pure evil. He would spend the next 15 years locked away, never speaking a word, until one stormy night he escaped. And what followed wasn't a killing spree. It was a return. To the town that made him. To the night that birthed him. To the shape of horror itself. This is the story of Michael Myers. Not just a slasher icon, but a legend of fear, whose footsteps echo across generations. Because evil never dies. It just waits for Halloween night. He's been called the Shape, a force of nature, the boogeyman made flesh. But what truly defines Michael isn't what he does. It is what he doesn't do. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't stop. That's why Michael Myers isn't just frightening, he's inevitable. He's the dread you feel when walking home at night. He's the silence just before something awful happens. He's the shape in the corner of your eye that vanishes when you look. Michael has no backstory that explains his evil, no trauma that justifies it, and that's the point. Because true fear doesn't come from understanding. It comes from not understanding at all. And in a world that always wants reasons, Michael refuses to give any. Which is why, decades after his first appearance, he still haunts us. Not just in sequels or reboots, but in the idea that someone, anyone, could become what he became. Not through magic, not through mythology, but through one single act of violence. One that echoes through every Halloween night that followed. Haddonfield, Illinois, October 31st, 1963. A night like any other. Children laughing, leaves falling, pumpkins glowing. And inside one house, a 6-year-old boy stood silently, watching. His name was Michael Myers. His sister Judith was upstairs with her boyfriend. Michael, left alone, wandered the house, but something inside him shifted. He walked into the kitchen, picked up a knife longer than his arm, then climbed the stairs, and without a word, without hesitation, he stabbed Judith to death. His own sister, still wearing a clown costume, still just a child. When his parents returned, they found Michael outside, silent, calm, knife in hand. No tears, no panic, just the blank stare of someone. Gone. That was the moment everything changed. Michael was institutionalized at Smith's Grove Sanitarium, diagnosed, studied, but never understood. Dr. Sam Loomis was assigned to him, and what he saw terrified him. He described Michael not as mentally ill, but as evil itself. He said that behind Michael's eyes was no soul, no conscience, no remorse, just darkness. For 15 years, Michael didn't speak, didn't move, just waited, until one night in 1978, he escaped. He stole a car, drove back to Haddonfield, and returned home. But he wasn't coming back for Judith. He was coming for Laurie Strode, a girl who would unknowingly become the center of his obsession. And on Halloween night, 1978, he struck again. With a stolen mask and the same silent rage, Michael Myers began a killing spree that would never truly end. Because that first murder wasn't a moment, it was a beginning. The start of a nightmare that has lasted decades. A child killed his sister. And something far worse was born. Judith's murder was not an act of impulse. It was an awakening. Michael didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply stood there as if he had done what he was meant to do, and that's what makes the horror sink deeper. There was no clear reason, no abuse, no warning signs, no traumatic past, just a quiet child and a sudden explosion of violence. It shook the town of Haddonfield, but more than that, it shook the illusion that evil is always visible before it strikes. Michael was the proof that sometimes it wears a child's face. And Dr. Loomis, he never stopped warning them. He begged for tighter security, pleaded with the town to prepare, because he knew Michael would return, not because he wanted revenge, not because of any emotion, but because that house, that town, was where it all started. And for Michael, Halloween night had become sacred, a ritual of blood. And so, with a stolen mask, blank, pale, emotionless, he returned. A shape in the shadows, a nightmare that never speaks, and a legend that would never die. 1978. 15 years after his first murder, Michael Myers returned to Haddonfield. He didn't announce it, he didn't threaten, he simply came back, and the killings began again. Teenagers were his targets, babysitters, friends, strangers. It wasn't about who they were, it was about the night, it was about Halloween. And at the center of it all was Laurie Strode, a high school student with no connection to Michael, no history, no reason to be chosen, except that she walked up to his old house and left a key on the porch. That was enough. Michael followed her, stalked her, and when the night came, he tried to kill her. But Laurie fought back, and thanks to Dr. Loomis, who tracked Michael back to Haddonfield, she survived. Michael was shot 6 times, fell from a second-story window, and vanished. No blood, no body, just gone. The town was never the same. Because how do you kill something that feels less like a man and more like a curse? Each Halloween after, Michael returned. Again and again. Sometimes explained, sometimes not. Shot, stabbed, burned. He kept coming. And each time, the legend grew. Not just of a killer, but of something beyond death. A silent, stalking shadow. A shape. A nightmare that can't be reasoned with, bargained with, or stopped, no matter how many times they tried. And with each return, the line between man and myth blurred further. Was Michael still human, or had he become something else entirely? Each survivor carried scars. Laurie Strode most of all, her life unraveled, haunted by the trauma, the paranoia, the unshakable belief that Michael would come again. And he did, in every decade, in every timeline, in every retelling. He found his way back to her, sometimes as her brother, sometimes as a random force of evil, but always as the same silent terror. That's what made him different. Other killers had motives, regrets, limits. Michael had none. He didn't chase fame. He didn't monologue. He hunted, and with every generation, the myth passed on. A cautionary tale in suburban legend. The boogeyman in the closet, and for Haddonfield, he was real. Because how do you defend yourself against something that doesn't want anything? Michael Myers didn't kill to send a message. He killed because it was Halloween, because it was what he did, and each time he vanished into the night, he left behind more than bodies. He left fear, a silence in the streets, and the sinking feeling that he would be back. Michael Myers doesn't have one story. He has many. Because over the decades, the Halloween franchise fractured into multiple timelines, each adding, changing, or rewriting the legend. In the original timeline, Michael is revealed to be Laurie Strode's brother, a twist that shocked audiences and gave their connection a deeper, more sinister weight. It continued through several sequels, culminating in Halloween 6-1, where a cult known as the Thorn attempted to explain his immortality with dark rituals. But many fans felt that made Michael less scary. So in 1998, Halloween H20Y reset the story. Only the first 2 films existed. Laurie had faked her death, become a school headmistress, and lived in hiding. But Michael found her again. And in a final confrontation, she beheaded him, only for Halloween Resurrection to reveal it wasn't really him. That timeline ended with disappointment. Then came Rob Zombie's reboot in 2007. This version gave Michael a brutal, detailed backstory. Abuse, neglect, trauma. It explained his rage, but some argued that took away the mystery. Then in 2018, the series reset again. A direct sequel to the original 1978 film. No more sibling connection, no cults, just Michael, Laurie, and 40 years of unresolved terror. This trilogy, Halloween, 2018, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends, focused on trauma, on how evil spreads, infects, echoes, and how the town of Haddonfield never truly healed. Each timeline paints Michael differently, sometimes human, sometimes supernatural, sometimes both, but in all of them, he is the same shape, the same silent figure in the dark, the same reminder that evil can return when you least expect it, and that's part of Michael's legacy. He's not just one man. He's a myth that adapts to the fears of each era, to the tone of each director, to the darkness each audience brings with them. His story isn't about continuity, it's about consistency. He doesn't need a motive, or rules, or realism, because Michael Myers represents something deeper, a question every viewer asks in the dark. What if something truly evil chose you? Not because of who you are, but because you existed. That's why his mask never changes, that blank pale face. It reflects nothing, it absorbs everything. And whether he's a cursed vessel, a broken boy, or just a man with a knife, Michael Myers always leaves the same impression. Terror, not just of death, but of randomness, of meaninglessness, of the idea that one night, without reason or warning, the shape might come home. Michael Myers isn't just a killer, he's a concept. He's fear stripped of motive, violence without explanation. He represents the thing we can't understand and can't stop. That's why his silence is so powerful. He doesn't speak because he doesn't need to. He doesn't show emotion because he doesn't feel any. He walks, never runs, because he knows you'll break before he does. In every film, he's the embodiment of inevitability, of fate coming for you no matter how fast you run or how well you hide. And that mask is the final touch. A human face, blank and pale, void of any soul. It reflects back your own fear, because you don't see Michael, you see death, and it doesn't care who you are. That's what separates him from other slashers. He's not driven by trauma or revenge, he's driven by nothing, which makes him feel like everything. He could be anyone, anywhere, anytime. That's why Michael Myers has endured, because beneath the mask isn't a man, it's the fear of the unknown. And that's the kind of fear that never fades. He's the monster under the bed, the shadow behind the curtain, the reason you check your locks twice on Halloween night. In a world full of complexity, Michael Myers is terrifying in his simplicity. He doesn't evolve, he doesn't learn, he doesn't care. That's why even decades later, with newer horror villains rising and falling, Michael remains, because fear doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs a shape. And in the end, that's what he is. Not a man, not a god, not a demon, just the shape. And it's enough. Michael Myers isn't just a horror character, he's an idea, a whisper in the dark, a lesson in how fear works, not through explanation but through mystery. He doesn't need dialogue, he doesn't need development, he only needs a door left unlocked, a shadow in the hall, a scream in the night. From a 6-year-old child with a knife to a myth that refuses to die, Michael's story continues because it taps into something primal. The fear that evil doesn't need a reason, that sometimes it just exists, and sometimes it wears a mask. If this breakdown of Michael Myers gave you chills, leave a like, subscribe for more deep dives into horror legends, and tell us in the comments, what scares you the most about the shape? Because the scariest thing about Michael Myers isn't that he's coming, it's that he never left. He remains in the shadows of pop culture, a presence, unchanging, unstoppable. He doesn't just return every Halloween on screen. He returns in our nightmares, in our memories, in our fear of the unknown. Because the story of Michael Myers isn't just about death. It's about the kind of fear that follows you home. So as the lights go out and the wind begins to howl, remember, evil doesn't die, it just waits.